I think credit will continue to be a very dominant form of money, whether or not it's denominated in Bitcoin or not, whether or not Bitcoin ever becomes a unit of account. One thing I believe, though, is that Bitcoin really changes the incentives in a really, really dramatic way for if central banks continue to exist and continue to issue, state money like fiat currency, they will have to do so in a world where an off-ramp to Bitcoin is going to be omnipresent, where they're going to have to think about the mechanics of how their currency works. And it's going to be a lot easier in the future for people to lose trust in alternative currencies if Bitcoin becomes an omnipresent global currency.
It's like another check and balance.
It's a check and balance, and we should want that, right? Like we don't
Yeah.
like I said, like I'm a small liberal, and the purpose of democracy is to give power to the people. It's not to give power to the government, right? The government is there to provide protection, to provide a common set of rules and laws so we can all be more free. So we don't have to worry about, you said earlier, like worrying about your safety and having to carry a gun, like to protect yourself at every moment of the day. Like safety is a form of freedom. I agree with that. I'm with you on that. And like, those are the sorts of things we want government to do. Things we don't want government to do is to come into our bedroom to tell us like where we can work and where we can't and where we can move, where we can live and like who we can be friends with and who we can associate. When government starts doing those things, and like I'm going to start sounding a lot like a crazy libertarian / anarchist too, right? Like I believe that there are limits to the power of government. And I think, we're moving into a scary world where the digital sphere is a double-edged sword. And we see both sides of those swords. On one side, we see it with Bitcoin, the democratizing power of it, the ability to return power to individuals in a way where governments can't control it, corporations can't control it. But then we see the other side of that sword with technology, with like really scary Orwellian surveillance states like China. Technology is very dangerous.
Or
very helpful. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, like the
NSA.
The NSA. I mean, the things that Edward Snowden exposed. I mean, these programs appeared to me, anyways, to be unconstitutional, contrary to what U.S. law appears to allow for. So, a government
Fourth Amendment.
Yeah, government breaking the law is a serious problem for democracy. Government should always be below the law. And so, like we need to start thinking about ways that we return power to people. And Bitcoin is super compelling in that regard. And it's one of the ways that I think we can really start to hopefully bend the course of history back to some balance where government is more responsive to us, more responsive because they realize that we have power to choose where we save our money, how we spend our money. I think I think I'm more on Andrew Bailey's side of this, that like I think Bitcoin may incentivize states to be a lot more responsible with fiat currency. And I said this at
I agree with that.
And I said this at Bitcoin Miami earlier this year, as I think ironically Bitcoin may be the thing that saves fiat from itself, because it creates this sort of check and balance where governments are going to continue to want it because so they can tax in that currency, because they want to maintain a welfare state and they want to be able to like issue bonds for capital investments to build bridges and roads and stadiums and all these other things. And so I think there'll be a great incentive for governments to try and maintain the power to issue fiat, but I don't think they'll be able to do it at the levels of irresponsibility that we've seen over the last 20 years. Like what we saw happen at the late 90s and early 2000s, and how we've blown up these asset bubbles with incredibly easy money policies, zero interest rate policies, that like we see these graphs from like the St. Louis Fed, and like we're like, what, like this can't, like how can this?
Well, what we saw yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, we were looking at a chart. We were looking at debt clocks. It's scary things. I mean, I've always had a very simple way of explaining this. Is this how I explain Bitcoin to people and why it matters? I said, if I ask somebody about their budget, when you get paid at the end of the month, what do? And it's, you pay for your house and your car, and put money by for your food, and you maybe some for a holiday, you have little bit left over. I said, well, what happens if you go over budget? I said, well, maybe I'll get a loan. I said, well, what happens if you don't pay the loan back? I said, well, they take my house off me. I was like, well, what if you had a printer up in your room and you could just keep printing money and kicking the can down the road? It's like, well, I would print that money. That's exactly what we've given government.
Yep.
Now, if you took that ability to print money away, I believe the government would run a budget and they'd have to stay within budget. They would have no choice because they don't have the ability to print money. And
no, they would still take on debt.
They could take on debt.
Yeah, but they would still borrow against the future.
But they could be bankrupted easier.
Yes.
And we know the US government is running the risk of default. There is a potential in our lifetime of a US government default.
Oh, there's certainly a potential there.
Which is
the
crazy.
sovereign debt risk in the United States is rising. It's troubling. I don't think we're near it now, but you can see how it could happen now, and that's scary.
But they should. If you look at the budget now, they should be slashing the military spend. They should be slashing social security spend, and they should be running a budget. To me, that is natural. And
I think it's inevitable that taxes are going to go up in this country, and people don't want to hear me say that.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I mean, they're going to go up in the UK at the moment.
Yeah, it's inevitable.
Yeah. I mean, we had Liz Truss try the opposite, which was to reduce taxes and increase spending, and she blew up the pension market. Now we've been told that we're going to see higher taxes and slash spending, which is sadly exactly what is required to get back to trying to balance the budgets as close as we can.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will eventually reach that point. I mean, I lived through a little bit of that when I was younger, right? And growing up in Canada in 1993, the Canadian government's debt to GDP ratio got frighteningly high. The government was 6 months away from default. A lot of people don't realize this, but the Liberal Party had won an election in 1993, deposing the Progressive Conservative Party. It was one of the greatest electoral defeats in the history of the country. I think the PCs were reduced to 2 seats in the parliament. It was a massive majority.
Sounds like the
Liberals had run on they had this little they had an election platform called the Red Book, and it was like all the crazy things they were going to do and all these social services. And when John Chrétien became prime minister, Paul Martin became the finance minister, they realized that they were in a lot of trouble. The country was in recession, and when they started to realize that the bond markets were moving against Canada and the cost of borrowing was spiraling out of control, Canada underwent what a lot of people at the time saw as there were protests and public sector unions were protesting right, left, and center, but the federal public sector spending fell by 40%. By the end of the decade, because it had to. The government saw the end was nigh, and the country had to go through some pretty painful adjustments. Taxes had, the sales tax, federal sales tax was imposed. The GST that actually did happen at the end of the previous government. Chrétien had actually promised to get rid of this 7% federal sales tax that was imposed, but then he kind of realized he couldn't get rid of it because it was like one of the few lifelines that was bringing in enough funds. But I was much younger then, but I think the United States is headed for a moment like that, where there's one day someone's in the Treasury Department's going to be looking at some spreadsheet on their computer, and they're going to realize, hopefully when they're not too late, that something has really got to change and fast, or the United States is going to be in a lot of trouble.
Well, like I say, the UK is exactly the same. Danny, it's another Canadian.
Another Canadian.
It's 3 Canadians. Yeah, it's been a week of Canadians. Somehow, have we been kind of group attack? Have we been civil attacked by the Canadians?
I'm also an American citizen. So I'm a dual citizen.
All right, fair enough. And so when you think about Bitcoin, then what are the important things for you? You see everything debated on Bitcoin Twitter, crypto Twitter. What are the things you care about now?
I care about building transactional utility for Bitcoin. I care about Lightning. like continuing to develop Lightning and address the challenges there. I care about like building decentralized identity in order to enable more robust self-custody scenarios. I think that like finding ways to make Bitcoin relevant to people's daily life, as opposed to just something that you like, trade on an exchange and draw fancy lines on charts and try to figure out like, is the bottom in yet? Is this the top? Is this the reversal? I think this is a head and shoulders pattern. Like, I mean, like
Death cross.
yeah, the death cross. Like this is like something which I am like very much uninterested in. I'm really interested in building infrastructure on top of Bitcoin that can ultimately like bring like a better experience than we have today in fiat. Like this is my realization as a product person. I worked on Cash App for nearly a decade, and my learning is that like it's not enough to be better. Certainly, it's not enough to be better just because of principles like decentralization or censorship resistance. I mean, these are not the reasons why people will use Bitcoin. I mean, if people think that people will use Bitcoin because it's decentralized and censorship resistant, then I have serious questions about like why TikTok continues to be the fastest growing application, social media application, given the fact that it certainly is not decentralized and it's certainly not censorship resistant. It's in the media all the time that the Chinese government has its hands all over that application. You and me are weird. Like we care about this stuff a lot. Like I care about like the properties of decentralization and censorship resistance and the fact that it's outside of the control of the state. My daughter doesn't care about that. My wife doesn't understand it, or she doesn't care about that. And this is me, and they're living with me, right? And they're kind of representative. And I think that this is something that like it informs my work. To me, TBD is like very much about like first principles. How do we build products and services that are easier to use? They're more approachable, they're safer, they're cheaper, they're faster than what people are using today. And that's to me is what this industry, if there is an industry to be called the Bitcoin industry, that has to be where the focus is. It cannot be on like, number go up. People got mad at me. I tweeted out that number go up is not a use case. And a whole bunch of people got mad at me and said, well, that's not true because that's like savings. And I was like, but I think, okay, maybe I'm willing to concede the point a little bit like that as a savings vehicle,
it's not enough.
It's good. It's just not enough. That's not going to sustain it. Like artificial scarcity is not enough to sustain something. I can create artificial scarcity anywhere for any reason, right? Like I can come up with arbitrary rules. Like people do it all the time. They're trying to create these new cryptocurrencies that we all call shit coins and stuff. But like, so artificial scarcity is just not enough of an incentive to make it work. The good news is Bitcoin already has really substantial market effects in place, like substantial liquidity all around the world. We can build payment systems on top of it. We can build remittance solutions on top of Bitcoin. We can secure digital identity with Bitcoin. We're doing that with Ion. And so these are all the things that like people need to be focused on in this space if they want to see this future, if they want to see that future where Bitcoin is a check and balance on the excesses of government, if they want to make sure that like Bitcoin is this emancipatory force that allows us to return economic power and political power, maybe ultimately to individuals, particularly in the cases of those people who are fighting for their right to be free in the first place, especially with the work that Alex Gladstein is doing, at the HRF. And I think that's how we have to think about it. And so I try really, really hard to avoid talk about the price. Like I try not to care about it. I try to be very dismissive about the price of Bitcoin on any given day because it's such a distraction to the hard work that needs to be done if we're going to build a new financial system around Bitcoin. which I want to do. It's what I'm doing like every single day at TBD.